No, no, continuez en public.
Continue. I'll just be very brief. I would just like to point something out to the committee members. Every single time we have requested translation, it has always been pointed out that this delays, or that this delays the work of the committee. It's not just because we ask for translation into French that the work of the committee is going to be delayed. So I think it's really shocking that this is pointed out every time. That document has been sitting there since 2006. So it should have been provided and be available in French since 2006. So I just wanted to make that point, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Recall at our last meeting that I had moved a motion to request information for our study on advertising that we are to begin today. We had said, in response to a colleague, we'd said we'd get back to this information again today. He wanted to talk further on this issue because he thought it should be more specific. So to assist in making it more specific, we have a friendly, I know there's going to be a friendly amendment to make it more specific, and I think that will satisfy the concerns of the colleague that raised this issue.
Mr. Regan, your amendment.
Mr. Chair. The amended, I think the simplest way to do this is to read the motion as it would be amended, okay? That with regard to government expenditures on advertising for fiscal year 2010-2011, this committee requests that the Government of Canada, through the Privy Council Office, and there'll be commas at both ends of that, okay, so comma through the Privy Council Office, comma, provide it with the following information by department in electronic form within 5 days. 1, how has the money been allocated? 2, what government program or service was advertised? 3, in what medium, print, radio, television, other? 4, what amount was spent? 5, in what geographic area, semicolon, for infrastructure, Canada, public works and government services, Canadian heritage, human resources and skills development, Canada, finance, Canada, citizenship and immigration, I'm sorry, Canada Revenue Agency. Did I miss that somehow?
Yeah.
Thank you. Citizenship and Immigration, Fisheries and Oceans, Transport Canada, Health, Industry, the Privy Council Office, and finally, 6, what the total amount spent on advertising by the government is for the fiscal year. And I think members have copies of this proposed amended version of the amendment.
Okay, motion's in order. Mr. Holder is first.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things, if I may. It follows on our last commentary relative to the prior discussion. Firstly, just as a standard comment, could I suggest that at a minimum, when we talk about 5 days, well, as you know, we have a weekend between now and the next 5 days. So let's just presume that, and I don't want to overly presume, but do we mean business days? And if so, can we make that as part of our standard comments, because there's obviously a difference with a weekend involved. That would be point number 1. And I'm mindful that much of this information is based on annual reporting from late spring, June through September. I'm not sure how much is available, so I will bring up the question again in terms of preparation, and that is as it relates to 5 days. It's a popular mantra around here, but it strikes, and I understand it talks to the urgency, which I truly get, but I'm not sure if it speaks to the reality or the practicality. So 2 things: if we mean business days, can we say that at least? And then secondly, how practical and realistic, notwithstanding the urgency, is 5 days with the huge amount of information that's here, and I'm not even going to get into the cost. But in the event that it's all in French right now, which it may well be, and all I want to do is have the English translation as well, and I'm not even being clever on this, it just strikes me that is that fair and reasonable, and I defer to the committee's wisdom on this.
Madame Beaujolais. Beaujolais.
Mais Beaujolais, Beaujolais. Well, that's an excellent wine, Mr. Chairman. My question is this. It's just to have some details. I'd like to ask Ms. Cody a question on point number 5. In what geographic area? Does she want a breakdown by province?
Please, by geographic area, meaning by province or by region, if it's done by region, so that we can understand where they're spending the money. Exactly.
Très clair, s'il vous plaît, hein, que ça soit vraiment une...
It's not necessarily very clear. It should be clear that we want a breakdown there.
If I may, I'm next. Well, we've been talking about doing this advertising study. Today is the day we actually start this advertising study. It would be very helpful to have this information in a timely, quick manner. This motion was discussed in previous meetings, and I would like to move forward as quickly as possible because we only have a couple of days dedicated to this. If we drag it out too much longer, we're going to get the information after we've actually been through a number of our witnesses, and therefore we'd have to actually call them back again. So that was why we were in a spirit of trying to address the concerns of colleagues by making this friendly amendment, and I would urge all of us to move on as quickly as possible. We have guests waiting, or witnesses waiting.
Mr. General, Monsieur General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to what Mr. Holder stated earlier and what Madame Bourgeois stated, I think it would be important that somewhere in the motion we see that these are 5 business days, not necessarily just 5 days, because 5 business days and 5 regular days are quite different when it comes to processing this request. And we've just gone through this with the other document. There's information that this motion involves. So is that a reasonable amount of time, in other words, 5 business days, in order to table that in both official languages? Mr. Vincent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, in response to what Mr. Holder and Mr. Généreux were saying, 5 business days is reasonable because the house will be rising actually for a whole week. So if you look at 5 business days or 5 regular days, the house is rising anyway for a week. So it's actually 9 days. And I hope that each department in its budget has included advertising expenditures. If they haven't, then things aren't going too well. Each department has to write down their advertising expenditures when they have those expenditures. It has to be taken into account in their budget. So it shouldn't actually be a problem to find out how they spent that money under their budget per department. They have 9 days to do it, and they should already have that information. I think translating into French wouldn't really be a problem because it's not. We've seen that it's not a problem to get that information in the other language.
The room that 5 business days, would that be perceived to be a friendly amendment?
Sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Holder.
I'd like to implore members opposite to regularly request such reports that the reference to business days be the standard. I think that feels reasonable to me. It's how we all in business have been mindful of that. To the extent that we define in our world here business days as Monday through Friday, of course, because there are those whose business days are weekends as well. But I think if we might, with that definition, and I guess I come back to the point of sufficient time. Let's presume. Let's hope that it is. And the other thing, unlike some of the reports in the past that have cost significant dollars that where the expense of presenting it in both official languages was done and not utilized, I trust the committee will take all this information in and utilize it. I think that's as much as needs to be said 3 times.
Monsieur Gourde. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to add a few words along the lines of the other comments. Perhaps we could point out that it be submitted in both official languages, and that will perhaps help. Ms. Cody, would you be willing to entertain that friendly amendment?
Okay. So
Very nice of you.
it's 5 business days in both official languages. Call a question? Those in favor? What unanimity? I'm so impressed. Thank you, colleagues. If I may at this point call the witnesses forward.
Parliament Hill.
Yes, yes. There might be a headline out of this. Okay, our witnesses are now in place, and I want to welcome Anne-Marie Smart, and I apologize for not being able to greet you personally, but we were otherwise occupied. I'm working on the assumption that you've been well briefed on the presentation and the anticipated questioning over the next while. And I welcome you on behalf of the committee and anticipate that you will introduce your team. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I did have about 5 minutes worth of brief opening remarks, and I will introduce my colleagues who are here with me today as I'm doing that. So this is a short, very opening statement just to provide members with an overview of government advertising and to start to identify the respective roles that my colleagues and I play in the advertising process. The current process for the allocation and management of advertising expenditures was established in 2004. It has 3 objectives. The first is to ensure that advertising campaigns are aligned to government priorities. The second is that they comply with government policies, procedures, and legislation. And third, that they address the information needs of Canadians. The
respective roles and responsibilities of institutions in advertising have been established at all stages in the process, including in the planning of advertising, in its execution, and also, importantly, its evaluation.
Board's communications policy and the procedures on advertising. My colleague Monique Lebel-Ducharme of the Treasury Board Secretariat is seated next to me and will, of course, be pleased to answer any questions that you may have on the policy framework for advertising. Generally, the bulk of government advertising campaigns in any given year is funded by what they call a set-aside in the fiscal framework in the amount of $65.4 million per year, and that is an amount that was established in 2004. Examples of advertising campaigns that were funded by the set-aside this fiscal year include Canadian Forces and RCMP recruitment, protecting the health and safety of Canadians, victims of crime, jobs, and tax cuts. I should also note, however, that this is not the only source of funding. Departments can obtain funding for advertising through policy memoranda to Cabinet. Examples of this would be the advertisements that you may have seen discouraging drug use by youth, which were funded as part of the National Anti-Drug Strategy. Finally, departments can also fund advertising from their operating budgets. Examples of campaigns this year that were funded by departments include a campaign on new employment insurance measures for the self-employed. There are also many public notices in a given year. Typically, public notices provide basic local information such as the construction of a federal road, job opportunities for on-reserve nurses, or other important information on a program that may affect local residents or for which a consultative process is required. Departments invest approximately $5 million annually, that's the total amount, on these operational public notices. Regardless of the source of funds, all government advertising is subject to the legislation, policies, and procedures that govern this function. For example, in order to access funds in the 65.4 set-aside, Departments and agencies work with the Privy Council Office to develop advertising proposals that are based on government priorities. The priorities are often established by documents such as the Speech from the Throne, the federal budget, or by Cabinet. These proposals are coordinated by the Privy Council Office and brought to Cabinet for consideration and approval. If they are approved, they are then submitted to the Treasury Board for review and funding approval. Finally, if approved there, they are submitted to Parliament for approval of appropriations. Once the funds are approved, they are allocated to departments, each of which manages their own campaign budgets and expenditures on behalf of their ministers. The next stage in the process is the procurement of advertising agencies for production and media planning. Advertising procurement is undertaken solely by Public Works and Government Services Canada, who work closely with and on behalf of departments. The procurement of advertising agencies is based on a competitive process, and it is in accordance with the established policies and procedures. Public Works also manages the government's advertising agency of record, which is a single firm that purchases all advertising time and space for the government. The objective of centralizing media purchase is to leverage the combined buying power of the government to obtain the best prices, whether it is for television, radio, print, out-of-home advertising, or web. As I mentioned earlier, advertising is subject to Treasury Board policies and procedures. To assist all departments to comply with the rules, Public Works and Government Services works closely with the Treasury Board to review proposed advertising for compliance with policies and procedures. And my colleagues here from Public Works are Mark Perlman and Louise Desjardins, who would be very pleased to answer any questions you may have regarding the role and functions of Public Works in the advertising process. Treasury Board policies and procedures also require departments to pre-test creative concepts for their ads and then to conduct post-campaign evaluations of their major advertising initiatives. Finally, the last step in the process is reporting, which is performed on a number of tracks, for example, by means of the website that the Treasury Board Secretariat has that identifies the monies that have been committed to advertising from the fiscal set-aside. Public Works also has annual reports on advertising that provide an overview of the Government of Canada's annual expenditures. J'ai fait le survol du processus en vue d'expliquer les...
I briefly described the process and I sought to identify the responsibilities of the institutions represented at this table today. Treasury Board Secretariat, Public Works and Government Services Canada, the Privy Council Office.
Thank you very much. I've also given 3 handouts, Chair, that summarize a little bit in one-pagers what I was talking about. So you have on one page the advertising management framework. You have some of the examples of major themes and campaigns for 2010-2011. And finally, you have a document produced by Public Works on the Government of Canada's advertising process roles and responsibilities. These are all bilingual, and there's considerable information in the little handout. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame Smart.
Thank you, Ms. Smart. Ms. Cody, you have 8 minutes.
Time today and for gathering up the information and laying it before this committee. We certainly do appreciate that. I have a lot of questions, so bear with me as I go through them. My first question speaks to your advertising agency of record. So you're saying the agency of record does the advertising buy? That's a simple yes or no question. So they do the advertising buy? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, I've seen lots of nodding heads. So they have the sole responsibility to doing this advertising buy. And you're saying that the Privy Council Office, in consultation with Cabinet, understands what is to be advertised, correct?
That's right. It's Cabinet that sets the priorities.
How much is spent on this for this agency of record? How much do you give them in fees per year?
Go ahead. The agency of record actually provides different types of services, so they're remunerated in different ways. They provide corporate services to PWGSC as, you know, a coordinator across government, and that includes reporting and that kind of thing. And for that service, they're provided a monthly fee,
Retainer.
a set monthly fee.
What's the retainer, please?
It's considered commercial confidential, sorry.
Oh, okay.
And there are variable fees that are established in the contract, and that depends on what they purchase. So if they're executing a campaign for a particular department and they're buying television, they're paid X amount of dollars up to a maximum, and so on and so forth.
So what I'm hearing you say, first of all, is this agency of record provides a very broad range of services. Secondly, that as taxpayers, we can't know how much, in a general sense, we spend on our agency of record. I wonder if you take that under advisement. Maybe you can't give me the monthly retainer, but you could tell me, you know, is it $100 million that you spend on your agency of record, or $10 million? Can you give us some kind of indication? Take that under advisement and get back to the committee, if you would be so kind. Can you also tell us the name of the agency of record? Yeah, that's not.
No, absolutely not. No, that's public record. Cassette Communication.
Cassette Communication.
Yes.
So that provides all the information, all the advertising by and advice to government. Here's my concern and why I ask these questions. I've noticed, and I've had a number of people come to me and say, how come over the last few months what they're seeing is dovetailing? So what happens is they see a Government of Canada ad, and then 2 ads later is a Conservative Party ad. So the question becomes, how is it being, you know, it can't be coincidental that you're dovetailing. It's very, very difficult to dovetail because, of course, there's so many advertisements in a roster. So how is it the Conservative Party is actually, you know, in the same cycle and roster as the Government of Canada? It can't be coincidental. So I'm sure you can't answer that question, but it does beg a question of how is that possible?
Okay, I'll take that one. First of all, we're not responsible for the buys for the political parties.
Understood.
That said, we do issue guidelines to the agency of record, and those guidelines are passed on to the broadcasters about proper spacing and how these ads show up in broadcasts.
Can you table those? Table that, please.
I could. Would you like me to go into them at all, or no?
Sure.
Okay. So, like for example, what it does is it separates how many Government of Canada ads should be in a particular broadcast, how many should be spaced out. There's also a separation that's supposed to be there from other levels of government and with political parties.
Okay.
So, for example, in the same station break, there should not be another level of government, nor should there be a political party.
Yet that happens.
Not that we're aware of.
Okay.
We're not aware of a back-to-back or a dovetailing happening. If it's brought to our attention, we will bring it to the attention of the broadcaster, to the agency of record, and to the broadcaster. And at that point, the broadcaster is actually asked to make good on it, and that's the term in the contract. Yeah. Which basically would mean that they would treat the Government of Canada ad as not having happened, and then we'd rebroadcast it.
Thank you. If you could table that, would be great. I only have a short period of time. Yeah. So many questions. So we now know today it's been reported there's a $4 million set aside for advertising for the upcoming budget, and the upcoming budget is going to be March 22nd. So that leaves about $4 million for 7 days of advertising. Have these ads already been prepared? And could someone answer that?
Yeah, I can do that. You have the allocations for advertising for the budget were actually passed last April.
Yeah.
So we didn't know the timing of the federal budget at all.
Yeah, the point of the matter is we have $4 million is allocated for.
So we won't know until the budget's tabled. We have allocated nothing. So.
The Treasury Board website says you've allocated $4 million.
$4 million, but we haven't allocated. You were asking about what's been prepared or allocated.
So you have nothing in the can for placement for advertising as of March 22nd.
Not yet. No, we literally have to. We don't know what's in the budget.
Yeah.
So we literally have to see the budget, and then we know there's only a week before the end of the fiscal year.
So am I supposing from what you're saying that you have nothing done at this point, but you've allocated the $4 million?
We've allocated the $4 million. We know
Okay.
we have a week, and anything that's not spent is returned to the fiscal framework.
Thank you.
So
I
we
have a
don't-
question on, this is kind of responsibility because it upsets me actually quite significantly. We know that recently there's been a lot of change within the moniker of the federal government, and we've got lots of articles by the Canadian press on this very issue, that the moniker of the Government of Canada has literally been changed to the Harper government. Now, my questions, I guess, are on the common look and feel. We know that, for example, the Federal Identity Program and common look and feel policies exist, but yet they seem to be now being changed so that you could use the Harper moniker. And I'm just going to quote from the Canadian Press article that says, you know, and I'm quoting from it, civil servants in at least 6 departments now say the naming policy comes from the centre, meaning the Prime Minister's office or the Privy Council office. Now, these, you know, the branding of the Government of Canada ensures, from an international perspective, that we know internationally we're known as the Government of Canada, and even federally, for the people of our country, they know that this is a Government of Canada official information. How is it now that we can be using the Harper government? And further to that, was there a communique, either verbally or in writing, that made that dictum?
I can start on the latter part. There was no directive whatsoever issued, to my knowledge. I'm in the Privy Council office, so there was nothing driven.
Yet it's been reported that 6 people, 6 different departments are saying it.
So there's nothing in the communications policy or the FIP policy that either prescribes or prohibits the use of any language or words. And the identifier that you're talking about in FIP is the FIP signature, which is
So how could it be that so many websites are now using, official Government of Canada websites are now using the Harper moniker?
It's in the text of a news release. It's not in the identifier of the news release. So all of our news releases have an identifier, and the identifier is the FIP signature, which is at the top of the document. So it's the flag with the signature of the Department or Government of Canada, and at the bottom the Canada word mark. And those are the identifiers of the Government of Canada. The information or the content that's within the news release, there's nothing in our policies that prescribes or prohibits how that language is.
Thank you, Madame Coudet. Madame Bourgeois, Bourgeois.
Ms. Bourgeois, you have the floor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming today. Communications is truly a fascinating world, one that we don't always understand. Michelle Doré from the Treasury Board Secretariat came before us to talk about the communications policy, the government's communications policy. She came a while ago, and I imagine that you work under the government communications policy. You work with that policy, do you not? Yes. Now, when you're working under the government's communications policy, you necessarily then have to be working under this coordination, this common look and feel policy. Do you? Yes, absolutely. Now, every time that common look and feel policy is used, I imagine then that any communication has to be approved through the Treasury Board, does it not? Well, that's not the policy that determines that. There are approval processes. Which policy is it then? It's the communications policy. Good. Then this moniker policy has been somewhat misused over the past while, I think. There are several articles that have spoken to this, several newspaper articles, and they point out that the current government has been changing the Government of Canada expression. Now, the common look and feel policy deals with several brand marks. For example, there's the Government of Canada logo, House of Commons logo, the flag, and Canada, the word itself, Canada. So every time the government issues any sort of communication or message, it has to use Government of Canada or the Canadian government or le gouvernement canadien. So in these newspaper articles, we've learned that over the past while, and not just newspapers, public servants have said that they have been told that they have to use the Harper government rather than the Government of Canada. So here's what I'm wondering. Why then is this brand name being modified when it's actually an integral part of the communications policy of the Government of Canada? Why is this happening? Could you just explain that to me? Well, the policy that you're referring to deals with 3 symbols and how they are used and how documents are identified. So every message that is prepared by the department... No, I'm sorry, please don't repeat what I just told you. What I'm asking you is, why is it that when there is a communications policy for the Government of Canada, why is it then that the most important part of that policy is being disregarded, which is that common look and feel policy? Every time we have heard presentations, whether it be from Treasury Board or Privy Council, we're told that every communication, every message is approved by the Privy Council office. So why is this being allowed? You're talking about that common look and feel policy, I believe, and that policy refers to how documents are identified. But it doesn't refer to the content. It refers to identification. And if you look at all our press releases, all communiques that are issued by the departments that fall under the communications policy and that common look and feel policy contain those 2 identifiers. The FIP signature, which is the flag, with the name of the institution or the government name. And at the bottom you see the word Canada. But with respect to the content of the document, there is nothing in those policies that prescribes what wording has to be used within the content. Then on that, who writes the texts then that are on the website? Let's say for the action plan, the government's action plan. Who actually drafts those texts?
Are drafted by departments, ministère, and submitted to the minister's office. If there's a change, like in my years at the Privy Council office, I've seen Canada's new government. I've also seen the Harper government. Those changes are made at the political level.
Alors, ce sont les ministères qui écrivent les textes.
Departments are responsible for the content of the text. Now, if we look at the action plan website, I printed off a few pages that I think really aren't even related to the action plan. And I could table them with the clerk, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like me to. But I thought it was rather strange that on an action plan website, which is supposed to promote various programs that will be assisting Canadians, one would find all of a sudden texts that are promoting, let's say, the Minister of Finance or another department or the Minister of Industry. I find that rather strange. Now, I see you can't answer me on that. So perhaps what you could do is this. Perhaps you could provide the committee with a breakdown of advertising expenditures on the part of the Government of Canada per province over the past year. So how much has the Government of Canada used or spent in the way of money per province, not per region, per province? I would also like to have the following information. When you decide there's going to be an advertising campaign, let's say there's a project on the part of the government, there's an action plan, and you decide on an advertising campaign, I'm sure you must have plans, certain criteria that you follow. Could you please table the criteria you use? And could you tell us what the priority criteria are? Is it, for example, information to Canadians, or is it the promotion of a brand? Finally, if I just look at other countries, what I'd like to know is how we compare in terms of advertising expenditures. Do we spend the most, the least? Are we somewhere in the middle? Could you tell us? Could I just ask you to repeat that last question? In comparison with other countries, how do we rank in terms of advertising expenditures? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very much, Chair. I'd like to thank our guests for. Oh, excuse me.
We had Mr. Gourde down. Is it Mr. Gourde or Mr. Holder?
Je vais commencer. Je partagerai mon temps si.
Okay.
I'll start. I'll be sharing my time with my colleague. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for coming today. I think we can all agree that advertising on the part of the government aims to promote services on the part of the government. Now, let's take the H1N1 pandemic. There was advertising there whose purpose was to inform the population, the public, on the importance of getting vaccinated. Do you have anything that can show you how important it was to inform Canadians of that need and how important it was to spend that money on that advertising campaign?
H1N1 campaign is an excellent example, actually, of an issue that arose very quickly. It was a global pandemic, and there were many, many issues around whether or not to be vaccinated or not, or whether it was safe. So we did do, as you say, a number of ads stressing the importance of being vaccinated. But we also, if you remember the ads, we also urged people to wash their hands frequently. And Dr. David Butler-Jones, who's head of the agency, also was showing people to cough into their sleeve. And, you know, so it is extremely important both for informing people, making them aware, and for changing behavior. So that's an excellent example.
Donc, vous êtes d'accord pour dire que la publicité.
You'll agree with me that government advertising actually saved lives in Canada.
Go that far, but a change behavior, yes. Dr. David Butler-Jones has told us that Canadians are well recognized when he travels, because he knows a Canadian because we cough into our sleeves. So he feels that he has changed behavior that way. But I wouldn't be able to say it's gone as far as saving lives, but it certainly is important to inform people. I would see that as a key priority.
Également, la publicité du gouvernement au niveau.
Now, let's look at tax decreases, for example. It's important that Canadians know that they have access to, for example, tax credits. So I'd like to know whether advertising actually led to Canadians being able to save money.
If you remember, in the last couple of years, we've been in the midst of a pretty severe global recession. And part of the goal of the advertising around the Economic Action Plan was to let people know, for example, there was at least 3 tax credits available to help them through the recession. There was the home renovation tax credit, which was extremely popular. And in fact, the recall rates when we tested post-campaign on that one were levels we hadn't seen before, around 70 or something. But people wanted the information and they went. All of our advertising is aimed at driving people to the website where all of the information about what programs they can apply for and where is located. So people did that. There was also the home buyers' first-time tax credit that people took advantage of. And also, just even around tax filing, we did a bit of a campaign, or the Canada Revenue Agency did, to remind people to apply for things like the credits under the home renovation tax credit. So it did save them money, but so that's one of the reasons why the advertising was so important. It was a recession, wanted to make sure that people had information to the services and benefits that were available to them, and thirdly, that they were able to easily access that information. So it was extremely important to do it.
Vous avez parlé du crédit d'impôt à la
You referred to, for example, the home renovation tax credit. I think that was very, very important because when that tax credit became available, people weren't aware of it. But as soon as that advertising campaign was started up, many people became aware of that opportunity, and they were able to take advantage of it through their own renovations. In my riding, 1 out of 2 households undertook renovations. So there was a whole sector then that was able to become more active and profitable. I'll give my colleague the rest of my time. Well, with your permission, I'll be using the rest of the time today. Good morning. I'd like to come back to the advertising. I've worked in that area myself, and over the several years that I was involved in that sector, I was able to see that there are really 2 parts here. There's the client and the provider when it comes to achieving results. And you're probably in the right position to understand that when you want to undertake an advertising campaign, you truly have to work closely with your partners, your contractors. And perhaps to contrast with what Madame Bourgeois was saying, I would say that you have to distinguish between the container and the content. There's the container, the brand name that has to be respected, but then there is the content in that container. Do you work on the content? That is, do you work on the substance of the content, on the message itself, along with your contractors or services? So you're not the only ones involved in the outcome of that product, are you? Let's take an example, H1N1. That final product, that is, the advertisements, weren't only the outcome of what you contributed, but it also involved what your providers or partners provided in the way of ideas.
H1N1 is a good example. The campaigns, especially something that important, would all be what we call pre-tested. Mm-hmm. So we would make sure that, the department would make sure that there was a focus group of people who were, with young children, another focus group of seniors, whatever. But you would test the messaging, and you would do that for 2 reasons. One, you need to make sure that they understand the message. Like it's pretty direct to say get vaccinated, but you want to make sure that you're explaining it to people in such a way that they understand. And secondly, whether or not you're dispelling myths. If you remember at the time of H1N1, there was a lot of misperceptions and myths and fears around. So when you're doing this pre-testing with your focus groups, you're making sure that A, they understand the message, and B, that it's addressing the key things that they need. So, and thirdly, you want to see if they're going to change behavior. So in the example I was using, coughing or washing your hands frequently, you're testing to see whether they got that message. So it's we consider it extremely important with major campaigns to do this, as you say, testing with the service group that's going to be in.
Monsieur Généraux, 10 secondes.
You have 10 seconds, Mr. Généreux. Well, I'd just like to congratulate you then on your work. I think you've done exceptional work in this advertising campaign, and especially in that regard, because Canadians actually changed their habits. So I think it did change lives, but regardless, your work was extraordinary.
MPs are all multitaskers, and with the permission of colleagues, I'll preserve Mr. Martin's time and turn to Mr. Regan for 5 minutes, please.
That's agreeable, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses as well. let me ask you to start with about the $4 million that's been set aside in the estimates for spending on advertising of the budget for the budget upcoming. That basically has to be spent between March 22nd, when the budget's delivered, and March 31st, which of course is the fiscal year end. Now you're telling us that it hasn't been pre-tested at all, and yet, of course, Government of Canada policy requires pre-testing of all major advertising campaigns. So you can understand why it's a little hard to believe that there aren't ads in the can already for this. But if not, then when will you pre-test those ads if they aren't going to even be designed until after the budget is tabled? And I'll start with that.
Well, as I mentioned, when we set aside the $4 million last year, no one knew the date of the federal budget, and we cannot begin anything for whatever money or any campaign. No, and we know that there's only 1 week before the end of the fiscal year until we know what's in the budget, and we won't know that until the day the budget is tabled.
And there's no way that Cassette Communications, who I think you're telling us is the company that's responsible for those advertising campaign, are they? Is that who's responsible, who will be responsible for that campaign?
They're responsible for the media placement, not for the creative design of the ads.
Who is?
In this case, it would be the Department of Finance.
The department itself designs the ads? Does it film them? I mean,
absolutely. All departments are responsible for their ad campaigns. We can't, Public Works or PCO doesn't know the proper messaging or...
Let me rephrase that, I guess.
Okay.
I mean, you're telling me that it's videoed or filmed, that the scripted, that the actors are hired, etc., by the Department of Finance?
Correct. Well, by the ad agency for the Department of Finance.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Who is the ad agency?
Yes.
Who is the ad agency?
For finance?
I thought it was a clear question.
It's OGGO Montreal.
OGGO Montreal. So there's no way that OGGO Montreal would be pre-testing ads now?
I don't see how.
There's no way that they could have had directions from PMO, for example, on what to start pre-testing?
I'm not aware.
Okay. So you're not aware. You can't say it's not possible. You just don't know.
I'm not aware.
Okay. Who controls the text in a news release? Who has the ultimate say?
It goes, any news release, it goes through the department drafts. It goes through the minister's office. If it's an important announcement, it comes over to PCO, and we check that they have the cabinet authority to be saying what they're going to say. PMO looks at it, and then it's approved.
But most of those ads, in other words, have to have the approval of the minister's office, which is the minister's political staff for a department, or the prime minister himself, in the case of government-wide, or his office, I guess, in the case of government-wide announcements.
Advertising goes through...
I'm talking about news releases.
Okay,
pardon me.
all right.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to tell you, advertising goes through exactly the same process as news releases for approving the content. So the department, the minister's office, checks with Public Works, checks with Treasury Board, ourselves and PMO that are involved.
Because if you're telling me that there's no policy saying that that the regime has directed that all news releases say the Harper government, you're not going to suggest to me that ministers' political staff wouldn't have been directed to put that in.
I don't. That's not for me to say.
It's not for you to say. I understand. Well, you wouldn't be aware of that necessarily if that were the case. That's what you're telling me.
No.
All right. Because it's certainly ubiquitous. I mean, I think it's fairly obvious. We've certainly seen commentary from lots of people in the media saying that this is a dramatic and obvious change that we see throughout government communications. Okay, let me go on. Who's informed? Who's informed about ad buys? Who in the Prime Minister's office is informed about those?
Specifically, the PMO communications folks would be.
And so does the government provide information on ad buys to the Conservative Party of Canada?
The government would? No,
does
we
the
do
government?
Not.
Yeah, is it, I mean, I guess you'll agree that it's possible that political staff in the Prime Minister's office could share the information.
I have no idea.
Monsieur Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to be too hard on you because I realize you're not the ones who decide how the advertising is going to be done or what it's going to be for. But from what I understood in your testimony, the advertising comes from the department and Treasury Board decides whether that will be approved or not and whether the budget will be provided for that or not. Your work involves checking to see whether those logos are involved, those 3 logos are involved. But you're the ones, not the ones who actually decide what advertising is going to be done. And you don't decide how much effort will be put into actually deploying those ads. Am I right?
Most of the priorities, all of the priorities for advertising come through, as I mentioned, through either the speech from the throne or the federal budget. So the departments then work it out.
Je comprends ça, là. C'est ça que je vous ai dit.
I understand. That's what I was trying to say. I was just trying to determine your role within that bigger picture. So tell us what exactly your role is. Because if it's up to the ministers or the departments to decide, and then it's Treasury Board that approves or not, what exactly is your role in all of this? What do? Do you consult?
It's what's called the annual advertising plan that goes into cabinet for approval. That's our job, is to coordinate and bring the proposal.
Votre rôle à vous là, vous êtes des...
You as individuals, what are your roles? What are those roles? What is your role? Ms. Ducharme, for example, what exactly are your roles? Well, my role is communications policy and the Federal Identity Program. So that means, so if I understand correctly, then you have to check which logos are being used, which ones are being there. That's your work within the advertising. You just take a look at the advertising and decide that the right logos were used. No, the communications policy sets out all processes. Okay, but it doesn't deal with the content. That's fine. That's the answer I was looking for. Because Mr. Gourde earlier on was referring to H1N1 and to the advertising campaign, and lives were being saved. But do you know how much money was spent on that advertising campaign? $6.5 million. Do you know how much money was put into the action plan advertising campaign that didn't save lives? $34 million. There seems to be a bit of a difference here. I'm missing something. We're talking about health on the one hand, and it's not as useful to the government, is it? But the action plan is. Could you comment on that?
But to the numbers, not the rationale behind it. The H1N1 campaign for fiscal year 9-10, I'll just came to $23.5 million. That was the amount that was spent on in total on that campaign. And the EAP Economic Action Plan, there was a total of $53.2 million. Was the amount that we have. And
pour quelle année? Pour quelle année?
For quelle année?
What year?
OK. Puis si je peux voir là dans les chiffres.
Now, if I'm just looking at the numbers we have here, approximately $80 million was spent that year. How much money was spent that year in advertising, total? That's what Ms. Cody wanted to know. You must have the numbers. In 2009, 2010, how much money was spent on advertising over all the departments?
2010, we had already released estimates. The estimated amount of $130 million was the total that we had released in our various order paper questions. We have since refined those numbers because we're preparing to release our annual report, and that's now been refined to $136.3 million in total for the Government of Canada.
Ça veut dire que l'argent qu'on avait au départ.
So that means that the set-aside of $64.5 million was actually doubled in advertising, because I can see here that some of the money that was spent on the Armed Forces recruitment, for example, involved about $20 million. I'm having difficulty in understanding two things. I understand that you're not responsible for advertising and that it's the departments that decide on that conceive it, decide what's going to go into it. Earlier, Ms. Duchamp, you were talking about logos. Well, we've seen that in some advertising there seemed to be a C with a maple leaf. Mr. Vincent? Unfortunately, your time is up. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, I'd like to thank our witnesses for attending with your testimony today. You know, it's rather interesting. I've heard a series of questions and responses, and one of the things that came up fairly loudly in the first round of questioning had to do with dovetailing ads. That is the apparent perception by some that Government of Canada ads and Conservative ads are within the same mix of commercials in between the content of shows. Sometimes I'm not sure whether it's the advertising we're ever watching or the shows based on amounts of time, but the comment came back by a member opposite that this quote, dovetailing can't be coincidental. But Mr. Perlman, you made it really clear from what I heard that there are guidelines in place in terms of the number of ads, the separation of ads, that they cannot be in that same series or segment of ads. And in fact, did I hear it correctly that you said that that if that were ever to happen, that you would treat the Government of Canada ad, the cost of it, as if it never happened? Is that correct?
In essence, that's correct. But what would happen is our agency of record would then go back to the broadcaster and try to make good on the situation. The normal practice for the community is that they would treat it that way, and then they would find another 30 or 60-second spot and rerun the ad.
Have you had to do that often?
Not very often.
So my question is, do you need to remind broadcast media on some regular basis of these guidelines? How do you do that? Please.
The instructions are included in every media plan.
All right. So another thing I'd like to lay to rest as well. It's rather interesting. I'm hearing more recently the Harper government this, the Harper government that, and I'm hearing that reference more from members opposite than I'm hearing from any reference to media. So I guess I should say thanks to our friends opposite for the continued support. In fact, it's rather interesting. I'm on the Standing Committee for International Trade, and it was rather interesting that the critic for the official opposition for international trade made the comment in referencing our government. She called it the Harper government. That was about an hour and a bit ago. And a witness made the same reference as well. And I guess if there was a perception that that was a bad brand, I suppose it's okay, because I certainly recall many times with various media releases from members opposite when they talk about, quote, the Harper government this or that. But now that it appears that the brand seems to be fairly positive, now all of a sudden it's kind of curious that it's somehow maybe they shouldn't be saying it so much, but it's what it is, and I'm hard pressed to understand that rationale, but it's what it is. I'd like to ask you, Madam Smart. It seems to me that the Government of Canada has checks and balances to ensure that our advertising process complies with existing policies. Can you help me understand a little bit better how these checks and balances work?
Certainly. Every year, the government either does a speech from the throne or a budget, and the priorities for advertising are usually laid out as coming out of that budget under themes. And I, for example, have done a one-page handout of the major themes that are actually related to the speech from the throne for 10, 11, so families, economy, recruitment. So when those major themes are established, my role is coordination and pulling together this annual advertising plan. So we would work with departments to pull together advertising campaigns under each of those themes. So under families, just as an example, you would have protecting the health and safety of Canadians or victims of crime, and you'll see the various posters there. As the departments pull together those campaigns, and they're the ones that know their clients best, so they pull it together. They would work very closely with Public Works to make sure that procurement and policies and procedures are followed, and they would work very closely with Treasury Board to make sure that the common look and feel and the FIP are identified properly in the creative concepts. As they come together, we also look. Ministers' offices look, So these things are developed not usually in a one step. They're usually developed back and forth, back and forth. They're pre-tested, they're adjusted. There's many checks and balances built into this as it goes forward. And then after it's over, after it's run, if the campaign is a major one, we do an evaluation. The department must do an evaluation of the campaign.
I need to stop because I just need you to reply in 11 seconds or less. I wanted to ask how you ensure the integrity of the contracting process, but perhaps more important right now, what happens to government advertising, assuming that there is no election? I hope that's a brief answer. There's a brief answer to that.
It's pulled.
It's pulled.
Pulled. Quick. We contact Public Works. They contact the Agency of Record. It's all pulled.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holder. Madame Cody, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask some questions for clarity purposes. One is, can you clarify, and this is just for the record, that you've never had a make good for any dovetail conservative advertising? So there's never been. I'm just wondering if you have, how many times, when, and where were these? Did that occur? Because you said that you're not aware of any of them. I just want clarity on that.
Yeah, no, I'll clarify that we're not aware of any. We have had a couple of instances where people have said that they've been close. We've investigated them, so I'll give you one example where someone said that the ad had dovetailed. I'll use it was during the Academy Awards as an example. Yeah. When we did check, the ads were not in the same station break. They were about 10 minutes apart. So it didn't work it wasn't in the same station break, but regardless, we felt that they could have been spread further apart. The broadcaster has agreed to make good on that, and they will give us, they will do a make good on that.
Okay, is that the only time that you're aware of?
Yes.
So there's just that one time during the Oscars, and you're getting a make good on that. I'm also wanting clarification on, I think I heard earlier that you clarified that the PMO actually approves the buy. Is that correct?
For any advertising campaign?
Yes.
All of the ministers' offices, departments, PMO, everybody looks and approves the buy. So yes, they'd be in the mix.
Okay, thank you. From this morning's newspaper, an article by Mr. Bill Curry talked about how an official from the Finance Department said that there was money being spent right now preparing advertising, but you're telling me that there's none that you're aware of.
I am not aware of it.
And you represent?
I'm Privy Council.
You're Privy Council, so you're just not aware of it.
I'm not Finance.
But I'm just reading from today's article that said, the Finance says they're in preparations right now.
I am not aware of it.
Okay. Thank you. I have another question. It goes back to something that occurred this past fall. In response to an order paper question from the member from Brampton Springdale, it revealed that the Conservatives spent money advertising on various websites, and one of the websites was called hollywoodtuna.com, and there was another one that they spent for Google Ad Girls, and that actually some pretty risque, I'm going to call it, pages came up. I'm just wondering who actually approves the spending of that money. So when I go back and I look at hollywoodtuna.com, if I look at some of the Google AdWords searches that the Conservatives have spent money on, and I think there's another website called photoforum.ru. It certainly would not be within what I would think the right and proper thing for the Government of Canada to be spending its money on. Could you comment on that? Like, if PMO, PCO is approving all the spending for advertising, then they have, and that the Cabinet is actually the one saying where the advertising is going, I'm concerned that, it's showing up on some pretty risque sites.
I can take that question. I think the incident that you're talking about, we had already been brought to our attention some time ago, and we investigated it. It actually was related to a D&D ad and dated back quite a number of years ago. It was in 2006 when the Government of Canada was just beginning to use internet more as a form of advertising. We do use it a lot more now. And our processes have evolved substantially. So, for example, again, like the instructions that Mr. Perlman spoke of earlier with respect to spacing of ads and so on and so forth, the AOR also has very clear instructions on the placement of internet that it uses with broadcasters, and it's done on a filter basis. So there's a whole series of filters that are in keeping with our values and ethics. So there are words provided. There are instances, there are some types of internet buys that do pose a little bit more risk. It's kind of technical, but at the end of the day, we've pulled away from those types of internet buys, so we're following it pretty closely. And the AOR, in addition to that, has put in remedial action because it also affects them as a company. So company-wide, not just in keeping with our stuff, but they are working with the network providers to ensure that these filters are very strong and are taking action if they're not adhered to.
Just reflecting on Canada Post website, for example, it was much more recent than 2006. So.
Okay.
Thank
you. Just briefly, please.
Yeah, Canada Post is not within our jurisdiction, unfortunately.
Okay. Mr. Clander, please. 5 minutes.
Well, thank you for coming. I know it's kind of ironic, because on the one hand you have the opposition claiming that we're a secretive government, but you hear today because they're also telling you that we actually advertise and we communicate too frequently with people. They're upset that we communicate too frequently about changes to taxes, that we communicated too frequently with respect to the economic action plan and to the budget. I note that when we talked about the economic action plan and the stimulus, we were told that we weren't telling people what's going on, what's happening. Then when we worked with our provincial partners to advertise and put signs up at all of the locations so that people could see the progress in action, we were told, well, we don't want you telling people what's going on. That's not what we meant. So it's very, very difficult for you. And we've seen, and especially in this committee over the last number of years, it's the last year or so, the public service is brought in and they're told, well, it's this and that with respect to the West Block construction, and then we find 2, 3, 4 layers of accountability is built in. G8 and G20, layer after layer of accountability is brought in. But what I find most actually offensive, to be honest with you, is the wording that comes out from some of the members of the opposition. Mr. Regan, earlier in his questioning, used the word the regime. Now, I don't know if he's being funny or if he just has the complete lack of respect for the public service that, as opposed to me, who thinks that the public service is doing a spectacular job. But it's just a commentary on the fact that when he says things like that, and when the Liberals in particular say things like that because they think they're being funny or they think that they can score some cheap political points, what they're really saying is that they don't trust the public service, the professional public service, and we've seen it time and time again in this committee over the last year. And I'll say this, I think you've done a spectacular job. This has been a very difficult couple of years. We've been focusing on jobs in the economy, and I know that's not what the opposition has been focusing on. When it comes to advertising, you look at H1N1, and you're being criticized. We're being criticized for spending on H1N1. Well, on August 12, 2009, the opposition issued a press release saying that the government should actually spend more on communicating with respect to H1N1. They repeated that on November 3rd, 2009. The actual leader of the opposition in the House of Commons said, we need to do more to communicate to people what's going on, and yet you're brought here today and told, well, you shouldn't spend $23 million telling people about H1N1. You shouldn't spend money telling people about elder abuse. You shouldn't spend money telling victims of crime where they can go to access help and information. You shouldn't be told about jobs in the economy. You shouldn't be telling people that you can access tax cuts in the changes that have happened as a result of the budgeting process. You shouldn't tell homeowners that you can get a tax credit for the work that you're doing at your home. For some reason, these are all bad things. Well, you know what? After a decade of darkness and misery in the Canadian Armed Forces, this government put in an action plan to actually restore the pride and the effectiveness of the Armed Forces. But we don't want people to know about it, so don't tell people about it. So we can buy this new equipment, give them the resources they need, but let's not do anything to recruit more people. So my question is this. because I know it frustrates the opposition to no end that this has been a government that has been extraordinarily accountable and effective with people's money. But just to go back, how do you ensure the integrity of the contracting process when you do your advertising, guys?
First of all, all of the contracting for advertising services goes through one group, and that's Public Works and Government Services Canada. So right there, it enables one group to ensure that they're following all of the principles of open, fair, and transparent government. Every contract for advertising services is awarded on a competitive basis. We work to put in a series of tools that are at the disposal of departments. For instance, the Agency of Record, we already talked about that. That contract was let after a national competitive process. We now have a series of 3 sets of instruments that departments use: standing offers for services up to $350,000. They also have access to companies that have been pre-qualified on supply arrangements, and departments can also ask PWGSC to run a full RFP process on MERCs. So every contract is, as I said, awarded competitively, and it's done on a 2- or 3-year cycle to ensure that there's a rotation and it's open to as many suppliers as want to apply. Further to that,
Madame Jordan,
we have. Sorry.
Please.
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Calandra. Madame Bourgeois.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's just make sure we understand each other. It's not our intention to just put all the blame on your shoulders. We're here to understand the process. And we're trying to get a picture of what happens when it comes to communications. Now let's take the Economic Action Plan. Yesterday I went to take another look at this. When you go onto the website, there are various photos there of ordinary people, the public. And so one might think that this is for the person in the street, and one might think that the website is explaining policies under the Economic Action Plan. But when you go a little further, and when with your mouse you go clicking on the photographs, then what you end up with is another series of photographs whose purpose is to promote either the Prime Minister or ministers. So you get photographs and texts accompanying those photographs that you would normally see on ministerial websites. So you'll understand then that this raises certain questions. Now, we know that this isn't, you're not the ones doing this. We know that you probably have to deal with orders and policies. I mean, people have said that. Reporters have said it in newspapers. So what we're trying to do is go a little further here so that we can obtain information that will help us understand this process. Ms. Doré came before this committee, and she was accompanied by Simon Kennedy. And I believe my colleague referred to this earlier. But Mr. Kennedy pointed out that the Economic Action Plan website is managed by the Privy Council Office. And you're telling us that the Privy Council Office is the one that decides what's going to be on a website, like the Action Plan website. So have I understood this correctly? COSEC Communications, you have to deal with COSEC Communications as well? Why did that name come up?
The website is for the Economic Action Plan, Action Economic, is not advertising. Advertising for the Government of Canada is all done through cassette. The website is not advertising. It's not considered
La publicité
advertising.
pour le gouvernement du Canada se fait.
So you're saying that COSEC Communications does the government advertising. So this is the same agency that we heard about that dealt with the previous government? Are we talking about the same firm? No. COSEC's been working with us since 2004. I see. So there's no connection with the COSEC Communications that had to do with the sponsorship scandal? No, at the time they weren't dealing with the government. But you're talking about the same firm, aren't you? I mean, they weren't working for the government at the time, but now they are? No, that company has been around for a while. Their first contract for the Government of Canada was as an agency of record in 2004. Then they got a second contract last year after a bidding process. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to go a little further. On the Economic Action Plan website, there are referrals to the Prime Minister and the ministers, and they are promoted. Even the Minister of Transport is promoted on this website. There's also a reference to the social media. So people are sent off to Twitter or YouTube. There are links. Who's responsible for Twitter and YouTube?
Plan website is indeed coordinated by the Privy Council office. And it is because there were so many government departments who were part of the Economic Action Plan. So you're right, transport, infrastructure, human resources and social development, a number of them. So that website, and I think Simon Kennedy probably referred to it as well, that website is the place you go to, and when you click through, it has all of the 134 measures that are there to benefit Canadians. So it's the one stop for finding out about training or the home renovation tax credit. But you're also right, it's also the place where up top there are, when a minister makes an announcement, say it's in transport and it's on the Economic Action Plan, we cross-reference between. No. Okay.
Merci, Madame Bourgeois.
Il y avait une deuxième question.
The second question, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, but your time has run out.
A pleasure to discuss an issue that's very near and dear to my heart. Of a marketing management major, I made my living for many years selling advertising, both print and television. So I really appreciate the insight from the government's perspective and knowing the importance of advertising in the private sector and keeping people informed, and in the public sector. Just could maybe clarify for the committee the agency of record how the process works to select the contract and remuneration. Maybe just go through the tendering process and how long is this contract awarded for?
Okay, as Ms. Desjardins had mentioned before earlier, it does go through the government purchasing site, which is Merck's. What happens is we have an open national competition. In this particular case, and everyone is able to bid. It's very open and transparent, and based on the bids, a company is selected. In this particular case, COSEC Communications was awarded, I believe it was April 2010, was awarded the contract for on a two-year basis with 3 one-year options to be able to provide this service. Is the way that we've done it.
So what criteria do you use to determine whether you're getting good value, the taxpayer is getting good value for the advertising in the contract?
The contract provides for 2 reviews. COSEC Communications provides services to my group, so it provides corporate services and does the, as I mentioned earlier, does all the media buying. So at the 18-month mark, so that's coming up, at the latter half of, well, I guess the beginning of next fiscal year, we will hire a third-party media expert to review the purchases made by Cassette or the Agency of Record to ensure that we are getting the best value for the Government of Canada. So they look at their ability to negotiate and so on and so forth and the prices that they're paying. So that's one. At the 2-year mark, there is a review that's done on every term and condition inside the contract, so, you know, to ensure that they're adhering to each one of the articles of agreement. And the contract also provides for ad hoc financial review. So at any point in time, the Government of Canada can ask to go into Cassette's offices and randomly pull one of the contract files and review them and check their finances.
One of the challenges, obviously, with the diversity of media out there is trying to reach, you know, Canadians as effectively as possible and getting the message out. And that's one of the, you know, when you talk with your clients, you're limited to dollars and getting the effectiveness of your advertising. So what do you do to monitor whether determine the effectiveness of your advertising campaign?
Do you want me to take that? I think some of it was alluded to before. There are safeties or different things at different steps. So before a campaign is even completed, there's pre-testing done on several concepts. So when you hire an ad agency, typically they'll present a minimum of 3 types of concepts. Those concepts are tested amongst the targeted population to ensure that the messages resonate with them. So that's one safeguard. At the end of the campaign, as part of the evaluation process, if they're large campaigns where the media exceeds or is $1 million or more, they're automatically subjected to an evaluation process, which includes testing amongst the audience whether or not they remember seeing the ad, if they can recall the major messages. In addition to that, there are also other types of measurements that are done. Typically, an ad campaign will have a call to action. So in the message, it'll say, call the 1-800 number, visit a website, take a particular social action, and there are measures against that. So we'll measure how many hits there was on the website, how many calls there were to the 1-800 numbers. For the home renovation tax credit, one of the results that was put forward was the number of people who actually claimed the home renovation tax credit. So there's different measures like that.
Mr. Cannon?
And one quick question. And so as far as you've been working in the advertising for the government for quite a few years? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so what's changed? Is it 2009, the restricted regulations, or what's changed in the process to make it more efficient?
The overall process, the actual framework remains the same, but as new things come up, for instance, we heard earlier about issues around the internet. I mean, there's new media coming up all the time, so we take care to review all of these things to make sure that our processes are adhering to new technologies. The other thing that my group does is we also take sort of an upstream approach, so we don't just look at things at the back end, and we have a very fulsome training and development program to ensure that government communicators have the best and latest tools and knowledge about how to manage their program.
Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Thank you, Mr. Regan.
Mr. Chairman, I note that Mr. Gord talked about the $6 million advertising spent on H1N1 advertising, which, as he points out, is designed to save lives. Of course, the government also spent $31 million on its economic action plan, which appeared to be self-congratulatory and designed to promote the Conservative Party. So that's an interesting statement of the regime's priorities. But who produces the huge novelty checks that the government uses?
We apparently have a point of order here, Mr. Regan. Mr. Callander?
I won't even dignify the stupidity of the regime comment, but it was actually $23 million, I think, that was spent on H1N1, not $6 million. I suppose that's one of the reasons why the Liberals are so usually off on everything, is that they don't listen and don't read.
That's a point of debate, such as it is, rather than a point of order. Mr. Regan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So who produces the huge novelty checks?
The PWGSC, there's for departments who want to use that kind of tool in announcements, PWGC has a sample check that can be used.
And I take it that the ones that had the great big conservative logo on there were not produced by Public Works. Is that's fair to say?
And not prepared by Government of Canada institutions.
Thank you. When was the first ad promoting the 2010 budget, approximately a year ago? When did the first ad air? Can you tell me that?
I'd have to check.
Can you get back to us with that information, please?
I just don't remember.
That's fair. Who's informed of pre-test? You said you pre-test all the ads. In fact, you're required to, as I was discussing earlier, in terms of the Government of Canada policy. Who's informed of the results of the pre-tests?
Normally, the departments and the minister's offices would be informed of the pre-test, especially if you have to make changes to it as a result of the pre-testing.
So the political staff in the minister's office would be aware of those results because they're informed of it. Okay.
General statement, but I assume yes.
Now, getting back to the question of the ads for this year's budget, which you've got 8 days to prepare, pre-test, and broadcast, which is a remarkably small time. Are there elements of these ads or key messages that you know already?
That I know? No.
Or that the Finance Department would know already?
I haven't.
Surely it would. But, all right.
It's budget secrecy.
Pardon me?
I was saying it's budget secrecy. I wouldn't.
Yeah,
I'm
fine.
at the Privy Council office.
Well, of course, but there are things, we have heard for months some of the things the government's saying will or will not be in there, and some of the themes we've certainly heard, so I'd be surprised if there wasn't already some testing of those. But what criteria do you use to determine that an advertising project should receive public funding?
It's a cabinet decision. As I mentioned, there's an annual advertising plan. Normally the themes, as you can see on the handout, are set through the speech from the throne or the budget, and it's a cabinet decision.
You turn it over to me.
I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
Thank you. I again, just following through what my colleague just asked, we're understanding that the Finance Department has said that some of the money has already been spent preparing an ad campaign and that it would be a comprehensive national campaign, just following up on him. So I'm hearing from you, Privy Council doesn't know about that, but the Finance Department. Okay, we'll follow up on that. When you determine that an advertising will air, for example, using, and I think you talked about it earlier, the Oscars or the Super Bowl. Now, I was in advertising a long time, not in advertising, marketing a long time back, and those ads are, at a hyper price. A lot more expensive than most, or I'm seeing shaking heads. So you're saying you don't pay a premium for these particular placements?
Just to clarify, when it comes to things like the Academy Awards or the Super Bowl, we have to remember that we're looking at the Canadian market, not the North American market. So when we advertise, we're advertising on a network such, in the case of the Academy Awards, it's CTV. We're looking at about a 3 million viewer population.
I did buy ads in both those, so okay. I know they're at a premium.
When we buy them, we always plan it in advance. We will look for a package. So our Gazette Communications will be looking for a package.
So it's a reach buy.
It's a reach, and the way that it works is the budget still remains the same. It's just it's trying to see how our penetration, I guess, into the market.
You've got 15 seconds.
I'll come back to my questions. We'll have more time.
Thank you, Madame Godey. Mr. Holder.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, I'll just carry on with some comments if I can. It's rather interesting. I've listened to questions from around the table and your thoughtful responses. But it's rather interesting. Here's what I've heard so far, and I find this very compelling. There's been no, quote, dovetailing of ads where the Government of Canada ads and Conservative Party ads appear in the same short segment. I've heard that. I've heard that there's been no direction under the PCO to promote the Harper government. We actually leave the opposition to do that. I've heard that all government advertising is subject to legislation, policies, and procedures, and that they are rigorous. I've heard that all contracts are awarded competitively. I've heard that by centralizing media purchases, that the Government of Canada leverages combined buying power, whether it be TV, radio, print, web advertising. I've heard that the Public Works provides annual reports on advertising to offer their overview of the Government of Canada's annual expenditures. Madam Smart, have I missed anything? Would you deem those to be reasonable considerations, those comments I've made?
Yes, the management of advertising has a lot of checks, as you said, a lot of checks and balances built into it. Between Public Works, the Privy Council Office, Treasury Board, departments, ministers' offices. I mean, it goes, any advertising initiative goes through a number of stages and phases and checks and balances to ensure that we're getting the best value for money.
The comment came up about some risque ads, and obviously that poses a concern to anyone, and should that be the case, I can't imagine that any government of any stripe would ever imagine wanting to be associated with that. In fact, what's rather interesting, I don't think, Madame Desjardins, you had quite the opportunity to respond to this, and perhaps you might, but when the reference to Canada Post came up, as I recall in the House of Commons, as I sat in my seat and listened to the minister's response, that he was shocked when advised by a member opposite about the association on this internet site, that risque ads were also associated or somehow connected through. And I was led to understand, I know this is not your area, but Canada Post moved immediately to remove any inappropriate ads. Can you help explain a little bit about when you talk about the internet ads where you have filters in place? Can you just, for those of us who are a little less technical, can you give us a little wisdom on that?
Yeah, there are, and it is kind of technical, there are different ways to purchase internet. And they have different cost structures, and they kind of do different things. So you can buy in a particular website, and that's easy, right? You buy in a website, you know where you're placing your ad. The way the payment structure works on these things, though, is that you're paying you pay by performance. So it's sometimes they call it cost per thousand. So it takes 1,000 people to click through for that service provider to get a certain amount of money. And in those instances, because it takes a lot of click-throughs, what they charge is a little bit more expensive. There's another type of ad placement called run-of-network, where the ad, when somebody goes into clicks onto an internet site that seems to have the same type of target audience that you're going after, the ad is served to them. That is typically a less expensive buy, but with it is a little bit of a higher risk because you're not predetermining where these will all land. So you're dependent on the use of these filters to say, I don't want my ad to be served to any of these sites. And we work very hard on those filters. The thing is, as you can appreciate, the internet evolves. New sites are added every day. So sometimes it's even hard for cassette to work with the representatives from these sites, and the reps don't even know necessarily how many new ones have been added. So the question was asked before about what types of things we do to sort of keep constant and to introduce new checks and balances into the system, and that would be one of them. So, you know, we try to build in increased safeguards as new technologies and challenges are thrown our way.
Thank you, Mr. Holder. Madame Cody, 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to move to the future, if I could, for a few moments. How do you review to ensure compliance? I guess is my first question. How do you make sure that all the policies that the government has are actually being met and the compliance is there? How do you monitor that?
That's a role that we play. at different stages in the process. So when an ad first comes into us, or when we work with a government department, typically it's at the very beginning of the process. They'll give us a call and they'll say that we're going to mount an ad campaign. The first thing that we look for, and it's in your nice little roles and responsibilities here, the first thing we have to ensure that it's a campaign that has been approved in the government ad plan.
By cabinet, okay.
That's right. So we work with them, and the checkpoints, the major checkpoints at the different stages are as follows. So at the contracting stage, before they enter into a contract, they have to send us what's called a 9200, and it's really a proof, a signature that the money is available from the department to pay for that contract before we start the contracting process. We also verify the creative.
So that's all up front, if I may, because you've tabled that information and we could just add it to her.
Sorry.
But so how do you monitor after the ads are run? Now, I pointed out that many people have come to me and said about this dovetailing. You said you do monitor that. How do you monitor it? Is someone monitoring where ads are being placed? Is someone following up at the end? I know you do a checklist at the beginning. What about in the end when?
For those specific things, that yes, cassette is bound to monitor the placements to ensure that they are compliant with the instructions that we've provided. I have to tell you, though, that they wouldn't necessarily, what makes it difficult in this instance about the dovetailing is they don't have access to other people's logs, as you would appreciate.
Okay. I'm so sorry that I have to keep interrupting you, but I only have a few minutes. So what you're saying is the ad agency does that. I do want to know, if I could, have you ever looked at other jurisdictions to see how, for example, the government of Ontario, the Australian government, UK, other jurisdictions might have in terms of policies, procedures, and overview of government advertising? It's a significant amount of money, tens of millions of dollars, and then I have to turn it to my colleague. So about a very quick response, if you could, whether you have and what has been your findings.
Question? Oh yeah, absolutely. We do it fairly regularly. We've spoken. I just about 3 weeks ago had a meeting with the people from ARB in Ontario to see how they do things. We do a lot of verification with our colleagues.
Did you have a quick second? Did you want to say something? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
The parliamentary budget officer this morning indicated that his research indicates that the F-35 stealth fighter jet purchase will cost in the range of $30 billion over its lifetime. And the question is, have there been any ads promoting the F-35 purchase, and has the Conservative regime, the government, vetted any ads or spent any money on advertising this purchase?
No, not to my knowledge, no. It would go through cabinet, no.
1.5 minutes left.
Okay, can I go? You finish? I just want to go back to this reviewing, because I think there's one thing that this committee is going to want to do is to ensure that we have the proper policies, to ensure that we have no particular interference. All Canadians want that, to make sure that we are spending our money fiscally responsibly, as well as ethically. So can you elaborate on some of the? So have you done a study on this previously, on the ways in which other jurisdictions actually run their advertising budgets and campaigns? Have you looked at this in depth and detail?
Typically, we've not done a study that compares everything from A to Z, but usually it's on a particular subject. So we've done it with respect to certain target audiences that they've done. When we were preparing to release the renew the advertising agency of record, we looked at the way other governments were doing it.
Do you note any key differentiations between the way the government of Canada does it and other jurisdictions? Run their policies and procedures, not their specific ads, but their policies and procedures around advertising?
There are some differences for sure.
Thank you. Okay, just finish briefly. I apologize.
I mean, it would have to be on a specific subject, but there are definite differences. Some are more centralized than others. I can give you an example. In Britain, everything goes through one office. One office does absolutely everything from A to Z for the entire government. That's very different from our system, where it's decentralized. The accountability is decentralized to departments.
Okay. Thank you, Madame Cody. Mr. Workington, last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And I will just reference my friend across the way, Mr. Regan, who was talking about the amount spent on H1N1. Obviously, it was far more than the money that he indicated. But we do believe on the government side that there is an essential responsibility of government to step in to assist to ensure that there are lives saved. When we think of the H1N1 development, there was a necessity for government to step in to ensure that Canadians were prepared for the impending problems that would come as a result of the flu, the flu, and you know, obviously, you know, we see the benefits of that. Canadians were well prepared, and many Canadians that may have been infected were otherwise spared from that situation. But he belittles the investment that has been made into ensuring that Canadians are aware of the economic action plan. And while it's an essential thing for government to help spare the lives of Canadians, it's also a responsibility of government to help spare the livelihoods of Canadians, to ensure that families have an income, to ensure that people have access to jobs, and that Canadians have an opportunity to take advantage of the measures that the Canadian government is bringing forward in terms of the different tax savings, the different training opportunities that Canadians have in general. And I think if we were to reference the different ads that were brought. Obviously, television is one, probably the one that we reference in our minds most often. But was there a program designed to link Canadians from one medium to another? Because I often think that, you know, television is simply that more obvious reminder to Canadians that they should look further. And so a common branding, when they go to a government website, they see, oh, there's an economic action symbol, and it would reference back to the television ad, but then going through to the internet, they would be able to find how they'd actually get individual services provided to them themselves. Was that linkage there? Is there a common effort to ensure that people can kind of follow the advertising or the common themes to where they might actually be able to take advantage of the opportunities government is providing for individuals?
Well, with reference to the economic action plan, you're absolutely right. There was a very deliberate decision to make sure that when that budget came down and there was this global recession going on, there was a very strong desire to make sure that Canadians had very swift access to the information about programs and services that could benefit them. So you're right, the principles of marketing, if you want to put it that way, were applied. And one of the ways to do that is to have a recognizable symbol, like the Economic Action Plan logo brand, and that it's consistent in everything that was done, whether it was the website, TV, print, radio, and that as well that we drove everyone to one spot on the action plan site so that they had one-stop service to be able to access, you know, a program that would benefit them, whether they were an individual, a family, a business. That it was really important to do that. And visible logos, visible symbols is just, I mean, that's one of the good principles of marketing if you're going to do something that important and of that magnitude. So yes, we did.
Well, I think that's important. I think there's probably lessons learned, and obviously this was a success. I talked to constituents on a regular basis who were impacted as a result of some aspect of the economic action plan. If it was a training opportunity for retraining people that had lost their jobs and now were able to access programs to help them be retrained for the jobs of the future, if it was for tax provisions to ensure that people could take advantage of lower tax provisions to lessen their burden and their output to government, so keeping more money in their own pockets, or if it was for, you know, some of the job saving measures that you know, some of these companies use so that they could keep employees on the payroll even though they didn't have the work, so through the job sharing program. And it was interesting to speak to some constituents who are actually employees at a particular firm in my constituency, and they were actually referencing a different measure on the website and actually came across the job sharing program. Their employer wasn't aware of that program yet, but because of them actually going for a different purpose to the website, they were able to access the information, indicate to their employer that this program existed, and the employer actually took advantage of that program. So it was a perfect example where the having people come to the one spot was an absolute success, and I commend you for that. And I think that that's something that was done right and something that should be considered moving forward. And maybe that's something as the budget's rolled out that it could be undertaken as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Workington, and possibly if there's a hiring opportunity available in any one of your departments, Mr. Workington could apply.
We always hope.
I want on behalf of the.
We're always hopeful that we're employable.
I want on behalf of the committee thank each of you for your appearance here today. It's been very helpful to the deliberations of the committee, and this meeting is now adjourned.